Hello everyone. In this lecture, I'm going to show you how we go from the Jupyter notebooks we were working with in our research environment through to a production package which we'll be able to embed in our consuming application in the next section. Before I show you this code, which makes up our regression model package, it's worth just pausing for a moment and imagining, thinking through, how would you design this? What do you expect to find here? That's a good exercise to do. Pause the video, think about how you'd structure this type of package. How would you convert what you saw in the Jupyter Notebook into production-ready code? And once you've had a go at thinking about that, then you can resume the video and we'll have a look together. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the different areas of the package. Some of these may not be so familiar if you're not used to writing production code, but don't worry, I'll be going into more detail in each of the different areas throughout this section. So I'm going to open up the section 5 directory, and first things to highlight, so these files here, the manifest, mypy, pyproject.toml, setup.py, and tox ini file, these are all things that we're using either for packaging or for configuring things like linting and type checking, these kinds of tooling configurations, and we'll be coming back to discuss these in more detail towards the end of this section. This hidden.tox directory is where tox installs virtual environments, and don't worry if you're not familiar with tox, we'll be explaining that when we start using it. We have a requirements directory, which is where we formalize the dependencies for our package and also for testing it, and I'll go into more detail on these in the next lecture. In our tests directory, we have a couple of sample tests that we'll look at towards the end of the section. And then the regression model directory is where the majority of our functionality is. If you just started feeling confused, don't worry. It's normal that if you're more used to working in the research environment in Jupyter Notebooks, that when you first approach production code, it can feel a bit confusing and a little bit alien. So what I'm going to do is create a mapping here and show you some diagrams so you can see how each part of the Jupyter Notebook maps to the production code and the structure that we've established. So to begin with, let's just refresh our memory here. If we go to our section 4 directory in the course repo, then let's have a look at the final machine learning pipeline notebook. And I'm going to jump back and forth here between the notebook code and this diagram that I've created. And the key purpose here is just to kind of refresh our memories about the structure of the notebook. And whilst this might seem a little bit repetitive, it will only take a minute or two to recap the structure, and then we'll be in a good position to map the notebook code to the production code. So that's what's coming just after this. Right, so initially we have import dependency code, and if we zoom in on that, it's basically everything at the beginning of the notebook, yeah? Importing pandas and numpy, matplotlib, all this stuff here, as well as the preprocessors module, which is just here, right outside our notebook. Okay, so moving on, we also have the load training data section. And if we go back to our notebook and scroll down, here it is. This is where we load the train CSV. Okay, so far so good. Let's keep going and establish this mental map of what the notebook looks like. We then have this preparation step with the train and test data. And if we keep going down the notebook, that's here, right, where we use the scikit-learn train test split function. Next up, we define a whole bunch of config, and that's just here in this config section. Then we have the pipeline. And here we use the scikit-learn pipeline. We specify all these different pre-processing steps. So the imputation, the variable transformer, mapper, all this stuff that Solé spent the previous section explaining. Alright, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you're unfamiliar, then just review Solé's stuff in the previous section. The key point here is to build up this mental model so that we can then map this to the code. Alright, so we've established we got the data pre-processing pipeline, and then once we've got that, we can train the model. Yeah, so that happens here with the fit method. And if you want to follow along, here are the Jupyter Notebook cell numbers that you can track along with. So we're at number 9. All right, let's keep going. Then we evaluate the model. That's here in cell 10. We perform some predictions and we have a look at them, kind of sense check and print out some of the prediction values, and then we do some graphing. Okay, now obviously in the production code we're not going to be doing the graphing, but we'll get to that in a moment. The second last step here is to persist the model, and if we keep going, that's what we do here in cell 13 with the joblib dump persistence method. So yeah, we save it to the joblib file, and then we can access the trained model as and when we need. The last step here in the notebook is scoring new data, so unseen data, with the test CSV, and this is what we do. So like I say, quick run through there because Solly's explained that notebook in detail in the previous section, but we can now say that, okay, we understand the structure of the notebook, and it looks like this. So what we want to do now is start to map the notebook to the production code. Right, so we're going to do this 3 chunks at a time. Let's start with importing dependencies. Now, in our production code, the dependencies are imported as and when they're required in each module. So there isn't a massive import at the top, it's in each individual module. So loading the training data, I'm going to head out of the notebook now and go into section 5 so that we can have a look at this as well. And as I explained earlier, these files here are all for project config, packaging. So we're more interested in terms of mapping the Jupyter Notebook with these modules and directories, and that's what we see here. So loading the training data is done in the data manager. Our data manager module has all the different classes and methods for reading CSV files and persisting data and things like that. We have lectures coming up to dig into the details of each of these modules. And to be clear, here where I say, okay, we're mapping this code from the Jupyter Notebook to these modules in the production code, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're exactly copying and pasting the code. In fact, in a lot of cases it won't be that, because we're splitting them out into different functions and classes, we're adding things like type hints, and generally tidying up and improving the code where possible. So this mapping is really about understanding where bits of functionality in the notebook get transferred to in the production code. The third step here is prepping our train and test data, and we do that in the train pipeline module. Okay, let's keep going. Config. So config is in 2 key places, right? We have it in the config YAML file, and then within this config directory we have a core module which reads from the YAML file and performs some validation, and in the lecture dedicated to this we'll look at that code more, but just so that you can map it in your head, that section in the Jupyter Notebook of config is basically mapped to this YAML file. Then the data pre-processing pipeline. So this lives in really 2 modules. So we have our pipeline and that imports some of the transformations and feature engineering steps that are required in the pipeline from the features module. And then the train model step is done in the train pipeline module. Okay, let's keep going with our mapping. The last 3 sections of the notebook. So evaluating the model, we don't do this in exactly the same way, but we do need the ability to call predict on our trained model, and we write some functions for that in the predict module. In terms of persisting the model, we do that in the data manager. So there's some helper functions in there for persisting the model that's trained. And then in terms of scoring new data, so this is basically what we do in the tests, and the tests will import things like the predict and the pipeline as and when required for testing purposes. So this right now is probably quite a lot to take in, and over the rest of the section we're going to be going through these files in detail, but I think it's useful to see how the Jupyter Notebook code that you're more familiar with maps to the production code that we're going to be working on from here on out. Here on the last slide we've got all the parts of the Jupyter Notebook and their mappings to the production code. This is quite a busy slide, which is why I've saved it till last here, but we'll have a screenshot of this in the lecture notes so that you can refer back to it as we go through each of these parts of the production code base over the next few lectures. Okay, to finish up this particular lecture, I'm going to go back to the code now and just highlight a few gotchas with getting everything set up and complete this sort of high-level overview of the production code base. So I'll head over there now. We have certain key files here within the regression model, so train pipeline, predict, and pipeline py. These are our sort of top-level files for the key bits of functionality of the package. And then within each of these directories we have different helpers. We have the data sets that we need, so test CSV and train CSV. These are from Kaggle, so make sure you've copied your test and train CSV files over here into the datasets directory. That's a common gotcha. And the train models directory is where we save the models that we're persisting here as a pickle file so that it can be loaded in and accessed in the future. So that's a deliberately quick tour of our package directories and structure. The rest of the section is really about understanding all the different areas, why we've structured things this way, how it helps us, and learning how to use it. So I'll pause now, and in the next lecture we'll start digging into the details.